Behind me, you can see what is known as the Ghost Tower, a replica scale model of what was the northwestern tower of the United States Arsenal that stood here on this site in the 19th century. In 1836, Captain James Andrew Jackson Bradford came to Fayetteville to choose a location for the construction of that arsenal and decided to place it upon this hill that had a command overwatch of the town. It did eventually become the safest place in the Confederacy, according to contemporaries, and was destroyed as such through a campaign of total war to end that Southern rebellion. Since then, local development and state and national dissent of that lost cause has further reduced this structure to only this ghost tower and the foundations of the Western Wall. This site was a part of local memory and state and national significance during the most trying period of American history. Its story lives on today, guarded by these ruins and told through the people that called Fayetteville home. The town of Fayetteville had always been a crossroads for North Carolinian farmers and commercial interests because of the Cape Fear River. The hope for expansion grew as people learned that investors planned to build a major railroad and an arsenal in town. Following the War of 1812, the United States realized they lacked the proper defenses and means for distribution of troops and supplies, and so embarked on a plan to build fortifications and arsenals along the eastern coast. There was not a single arsenal of first-class storage or general manufacturing capabilities between Washington, D.C. and Augusta, Georgia. On April 19, 1838, the cornerstone for the United States Arsenal in Fayetteville was laid. Captain Bradford wrote the War Department about the ceremony.
I take great pleasure in being able to inform you that the cornerstone of the North Carolina Arsenal was most happily and satisfactorily put in position yesterday afternoon. I have never before seen so handsome and orderly a procession, nor was there ever collected together here, as I am informed, so large a number of citizens on any previous occasion.
The excitement and economic opportunity of such a large project was the source of local support and pride. During peak phases of construction, the arsenal site employed over 200 free and enslaved men, women, and children. Compared to the population in the 1840s, that would be the equivalent of one local business employing over 18,000 people today. Those peaks and opportunities varied, however, according to national interest, funding, and internal social dynamics. Fayetteville had always been a diverse town that benefited from a large, skilled workforce. However, when outside interests, such as the federal government, looked to employ those locals, they realized that most of them were free and enslaved African Americans. Captain Bradford and others sent here to work on the arsenal were not accustomed to relying on such a diverse group of people for day-to-day operations. He wrote the War Department again, hoping that they would allow him to hire white laborers from the north.
With respect to workmen, none are resident here or in this neighborhood, except for a very few of the most ordinary skill. They are chiefly free Negroes and slaves.
Planning and development of the arsenal required specific considerations and measures be taken that not only fulfilled national defense needs, but acknowledged a more troubling concern for domestic insurrection. The main arsenal building was one of the first structures to be completed and was regarded as a potential citadel and last defense against locals. The structure of the outer walls were not meant to defend against the regular army, but acted more as a deterrent to local insurrection, as Colonel George Talcott expressed during a visit in 1844.
If constructed with embrasures for 4-pound guns or 12-pound mountain howitzers, as I would respectfully request may be permitted to be done, when armed with either, would give confidence to the people and effectually overawe the peculiar class, the blacks of this population.
Their concerns and sentiments would have been influenced by recent events in state and national civil rights. In 1831, Nat Turner, an enslaved man from Virginia, revolted, freed others, and killed over 60 white men, women, and children. In 1835, the North Carolina Constitution was amended to further restrict the enslaved and take away the right to vote from all free black men in the state. Although Captain Bradford did receive permission to hire from outside the local area, work rosters and correspondence throughout the arsenal's 20-year construction list the numbers, names, and accounts of the enslaved men and free black laborers that worked at the site. During the raising of a joist at the main arsenal building, Captain Bradford wrote,
"It suddenly slipped from the slings and, falling upon a black laborer, injured him so that he died within half an hour. This was the first accident of any kind we have had."
This spot right here represents the northwestern corner of that arsenal building that Bradford wrote about. Right here could be the very spot that that black laborer was working when that joist fell and killed him. Work on the arsenal continued, but it never fully operated as a federal arsenal of construction. Local transportation failed to develop as promised, and the decision to build the arsenal in Fayetteville was regarded as a mistake. Though downgraded to an arsenal of deposit, and now overlooked as having any strategic value to national defense, the United States Arsenal in Fayetteville was the site of growing tension and fear, as it was still an intimidating structure and represented the government, as did the armories in Springfield and Harper's Ferry. In 1859, John Brown, a white abolitionist, coordinated an attack on the Harper's Ferry Arsenal in Virginia. Although he was quickly subdued, with him was a free black man named Lewis Leary, who was originally from Fayetteville, North Carolina. Locals here in Fayetteville and the mayor petitioned directly to the War Department to have a permanent garrison assigned to the arsenal to protect them from, I quote, similar acts of insurrection. An artillery company from Fort Hamilton, New York arrived, and among them was Lieutenant J.A. Delagno, who along with Captain Bradford would eventually surrender this arsenal to state militia forces at the beginning of the American Civil War.
Sir, I have the painful duty to report to you that today a force of 1,050 troops of North Carolina appeared before this arsenal to demand the rendition of its possession to the state. It is impossible for me to convey to you the intensity of the excitement presently prevailing among all classes of the people of this region.
Shortly after the surrender, Captain Bradford and Lieutenant Delagno resigned their commissions as federal officers and joined the Confederacy in a most striking and local representation of brother fighting brother. Delagno returned to command the arsenal as a Confederate officer, and Bradford, after being fatally injured in battle fighting for North Carolina, also returned to Fayetteville and was buried here in Cross Creek Cemetery in 1863. While their stories and ideals are forever immortalized at other sites in North Carolina, here we have the story of the women, children, free and enslaved African Americans that were left in Fayetteville to survive and adapt to the war at home. The experiences of the soldiers have become a part of established memory, while the contributions of everyone else have been traditionally overlooked and irrelevant to history. It is clear now that in remembering everyone, the Fayetteville Arsenal was witness to a comprehensive human experience of the Civil War. From April 22nd, 1861 to March 11th, 1865, the Arsenal in Fayetteville, North Carolina operated in support of state and Confederate forces. Known as one of the holy grails of Civil War collectibles, the Fayetteville rifle was made here, and only here, while most other soldiers, both Union and Confederate, used foreign-made rifles. Though interesting, that contribution was vastly overshadowed by the amount of ammunition that was made on site. From January to August of 1864 alone, over 900,000 cartridges of ammunition were made. Especially interesting is the information obtained from an arsenal work roster from August of 1861. Listed on it are the names of 29 women whose average age was 20 years old, with the youngest, Dissy Burkett, being only 11. These women rolled the ammunition cartridges here while most of the men in town were off fighting in the war. This was also the only place they had contact with men their age. Several of them eventually married Arsenal guards. Sisters Sarah and Charity Wright went on to marry soldiers on either side of the conflict. Again, another story of this unique American experience. Also on that same work roster is the name of a young Prussian boy, Moses Owelsner. Local and federal census records show that he migrated from Pennsylvania and was just 13 years old when working at the arsenal. As a child, he only made $11.75 for a month's work, compared to $23.50 for Prince, a slave laborer, and $27 for John Martin, an adult white laborer. Now let me reiterate the significance of what I just shared. A 13-year-old boy made half as much as an enslaved man did working at the arsenal. And to make it more interesting, we also have the wages of those 29 women as well. And they also only made half as much as all the enslaved men working at the arsenal. While giving tours here and discussing our research, we have speculated that this was because, although an enslaved man lacked the agency to haggle a good wage, a master would ensure that he was paid well. Young children and women, however, could represent themselves when getting work, but they had little control over financial decisions due to 19th century patriarchal dynamics. The work roster also includes the names of 22 enslaved men. Besides the details of their work and wages made for 1 month in 1861, we only have their first names to remember them by. Now it is early 1865, and the nation has been at war for 4 years. General William Tecumseh Sherman, leading an army of 100,000 Union soldiers, has just marched through Georgia, burned Atlanta to the ground, and offered the strategic port city of Savannah to President Abraham Lincoln as a Christmas present. Imagine an army so large that it covers an expanse of 40 miles across as it travels north through the Carolinas, with each left and right wing simultaneously targeting different objectives as it moves. Those two wings only came together in 2 towns outside of Georgia, and then at one last decisive battle in North Carolina. The first objective was Columbia, South Carolina, which burned to the ground, and the second was right here in Fayetteville, North Carolina, where now 60,000 Union soldiers prepared to destroy this arsenal. In a book titled War Days of Fayetteville, Mrs. Josephine Worth wrote of her experiences when General Sherman's army came through town. She wrote that their first encounter with his army was when an African-American man rode past her home with the utmost speed, his eyes looking as if they would pop out of his head with fright, and with every bound, he screamed, "The Yankees! The Yankees!" The town of Fayetteville had a population of 4,000 people, according to the 1860 census. Compared to today's population, we would need 3 million soldiers to march into town right now for us to feel the impact that 60,000 soldiers had on the locals in 1865. They camped on every lawn, foraged for food in every home, burned foundries, mills, the offices to the local newspapers, and the arsenal.
Where other people live, we can, even if they have to starve or move away.
Fayetteville was not the exception to total war that General Sherman himself would have hoped for, and that people today might have expected. Retreating Confederates burned the only bridge over the Cape Fear River for miles, and as his army settled in, General Sherman came face to face with the realities of a civil war right here at the arsenal. Among the locals was the widow of his first commanding officer from before the war, whose son was the current Confederate commander of the arsenal. He was also approached by a pre-war acquaintance by the name of Edward Monaghan. Edward had 2 sons serving on the Arsenal Guard, in hope that General Sherman would spare his home, which he did, but with chosen words.
There is room enough in this world, even for traitors.
Behind me, you can see Edward's home that is still on the Arsenal site and a remnant of their story. Another long forgotten account of this epic human experience that occurred here at the Arsenal was General Sherman's decision to have liberated tens of thousands of people that straggled behind his army. They were the men, women, children, elderly, and recently freed slaves of the Carolinas that had nothing left and nowhere else to go but north after his army passed through. They were put on boats on the Cape Fear River and sent to Wilmington, North Carolina, with Fayetteville being their last stretch of war before ultimate freedom.
The Yankees came through Fayetteville wearing large blue coats with capes on them. Lots of them were mounted, and there were thousands of foot soldiers. They told us we were all free.
Over the years, its physical structure has endured through war, reconstruction, and uncertainty, since these ruins, among other Civil War relics of the South, have been associated with a lost cause and social injustice. Failing to recognize the significance of this site and others like it, however, means you will also fail to acknowledge the life of Dissy Burkett, Sarah and Charity Wright, Moses, and Prince. So be sure to visit the Arsenal here in Fayetteville, North Carolina, and help us in rediscovering their stories as we break down our own walls and establish a collective and enduring memory of what this site and the people from it mean to us today.